All right. Well, hi everyone. To TMAC members, thanks for joining us again today for another TMAC webinar. Today with us we have Joe Grabowski, who is Vice President at Treasury Talent, which is a Treasury-specific recruitment firm. He oversees the U.S. operations for Treasury Talent while focusing on recruitment in the Eastern region of the United States. He has been in the recruitment space for 14 years and has experience in corporate and third-party recruiting across various industries, IT, healthcare, and treasury, and executive search. He is consultative, customer-focused, data-driven, and a constant learner. He enjoys coaching, mentoring, and problem solving, and Joe lives in the Metro Detroit area. So Joe, thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to your presentation.
No, absolutely, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate you extending the olive branch to a Detroiter. I know it's not always easy, depending on sports and everything else that's going on, but I promise to take it easy on you guys today. So, with that, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm hoping this goes as it should. We shall see. All right, everything good there?
Yep, looks good.
All right, cool. So this is video interviewing tips for Treasury professionals. It's kind of interesting. This presentation actually originated with from a conversation with the North Carolina Treasury Management Association. Just in speaking with them, they had some members. This is at the beginning of the pandemic. They had some members who were, as video was kind of the new kid on the block as we transitioned to remote operations. A lot of people were really uncomfortable as hiring started to come back. You're just getting tripped up over very simple things. And then it kind of evolved into, as you transition from an individual contributor into a leader, there traditionally isn't very much interview coaching that goes into that. And all of a sudden you're put in the hiring manager's seat, and it's like, okay, well, what do I do? How do I conduct an interview? Hopefully you have like a guide or something that comes along with that. But if nothing else, this will just be a nice reminder for some. It'll be some new information for others. And with that, away we'll go. Really what I want to cover today is, number one, I think it's important to share with you my goal for this presentation overall. That way you keep that in the back of your head as I'm going on and talking to you about virtual interviewing and video interviewing. I want to talk about why this matters. I kind of touched on it a little bit at the very beginning, but I think it's important. And then also we'll actually get into the video interview tips. If you follow us on YouTube or on LinkedIn, anything like that, you've probably seen some of these before. But it's good to have that refresher, and it usually generates some pretty good conversation within the presentation. So my goals for today, I want to make this interactive. I have Chris and Patrick as panelists. If you have any questions along the way, please feel free to ask them, and Chris and Patrick, just feel free to ask them on behalf of the group. I can't see the chat function right now, but I'm used to being in person for these, where you could actually read the room a little bit better and take questions as it's coming along. Again, that's something that we'll cover in a little bit. It's one of the challenges that exist with virtual meetings or virtual interviews. But really, overall, this is a donation of my time and effort to give back to the Treasury community because I saw an opportunity. My entire career has been in recruiting. It's been for 14 years. Chris mentioned that it's spanned many different industries and many different engagements. And really what I do at Treasury Talent is I'm talking to folks on both sides of the hiring equation each and every day. So it's anything from treasurers to analysts to back office, whatever it may be. And I pick up nuances in conversation and just in the interview preps that we do with the people that we work with for their job searches. And with clients, there's a lot of interview coaching that goes on, so we figured we'll take this on a more public stage. I want it to be informative, thought-provoking, and through that, it's just going to be, it's not, you may have an aha moment here and there. Some of it may just be a quick refresher, or if nothing else, a confirmation of what you're doing is the right thing to do. I want it to be informative and beneficial. So these tips are going to be beneficial or applicable to both the interviewers and interviewees. Doesn't matter which side of the desk you're sitting on. And really, because a lot of no matter which side you're sitting on, you face the same challenges and you can be tripped up by the same things, which can ultimately impact whether or not you get the job or whether or not you make a good impression on the person you're trying to hire. So basically, just to take it a step further, I want to provide the interviewer's perspective for the job seekers. So, if you haven't interviewed for a while, or if you're going through a lot of interviews, or if you're actively seeking, you can kind of anticipate what the format of the interview is going to be and what to keep an eye out for as you are proceeding with your interview and with your job search. On the interviewee side, everyone looks for a new job and has to interview at some point, and the interview landscape is changing. So if you're not comfortable in front of a camera, if you're not comfortable in front of technology, even seeing yourself, I know that was one of the big adjustments for me, is you're sitting in front of a screen watching yourself talk while you're talking to other people. That can be a little daunting if you're not careful. Usually I'll keep some sort of window or something over that so I don't have to watch myself. But the idea is really to just ensure that you're not tripping yourself up and you're able to put your best foot forward. And that's why I also wanted to make these tips simple and applicable. If I make this overly complicated, you're going to freak yourself out. You'll have nothing or no interest in trying to take anything away from this. And the beauty is in the simplicity. So that's really what I wanted to do with this presentation to ensure it would be effective for you. So why does this matter? Basically, getting to the interview stage isn't even easy as a job seeker. I'm going to reverse engineer the hiring funnel for you for a minute, just on a little bit of research that I've done. So as a job seeker, you're roughly spending 11 hours a week looking for work, according to Career Builder. That could be anything from prepping for interviews to applying to jobs to researching companies, whatever that may be. But the average corporate job advertisement receives roughly about 250 applicants. And that was pre-pandemic, keep in mind. So, obviously a few more people looking for work since the pandemic has taken hold, the longer that it does take hold. What you want to do is, if you get to this stage, you want to make sure that you're putting that best foot forward for the interviewer to ensure that you're giving your best shot at getting the job. So we reverse engineer it. You're spending 11 hours. You're up against roughly 250 people or so. On average, only about 5 people are selected to move forward to the interview rounds. So all of a sudden, if you make it to that round, you're 5 out of 250. One of 5, I guess, is what it's going to come down to. And then in most cases, only one person is going to be hired. I've run into situations over the course of my career where even the silver medalist is what you'd call the second place person. Even that person, maybe there's a position that's created or they're kept in a pipeline for future hiring needs. But for the most part, you have a 1 in 250 shot, if not a little bit longer than that. I'm not saying that to scare anyone. It's just it's good to know your competition and good to know. And it's also why this is important. So the interview format is definitely changing. Just for interviewees, heading into the pandemic, the interview landscape already was changing, and more companies were already moving toward video interviews. And that's obviously been escalated even since in-person meetings, for the most part, are no longer possible. According to a Forbes article that I came across that was written in May, 89% of companies were already adopting video interviewing at some point in their interview process. And now, you can safely say, maybe given a few exceptions, that you're closer to that 100% mark. So, and if you're looking why it's important for you, maybe you're sitting saying, well, I hire people, I don't necessarily have to look for a job. If you're more senior level, you're up against a lot of competition when it comes to openings. You're higher up on the totem pole when it comes to Treasury, and how I'm going to refer to senior level is going to be your directors, your assistant treasurers, your treasurers. Just to give you an idea, this is important for you because if you are looking for a job, only about 16% or 16.7% of the jobs that have been advertised in Chicago this year or in Illinois or are at that director level and above. Now that's publicly advertised. Of course, you're going to have your searches that are taking place where maybe it's not publicly advertised, but the whole point is, your entry levels, your managers and your analysts, and I'll get into that in a minute, they tend to be a little bit more competitive for companies looking to hire, which is why it's important for interviewers to have, their head on straight and make sure that they're providing a good interview experience for people. But as an interviewee, as a senior level professional, you have a lot of competition. Usually in most cases, you're competing against 4 different levels, especially at the director level. You're up against the managers who are ready to make that jump into a director, directors who already have the title, and then I hate to paint with a broad brush, but a lot of the ATs or the assistant treasurers and the treasurers that I speak with, by that point, they've already made their money. They've already chased the title. They've chased the bigger scope. Now they care more just about being paid fairly, liking the work that they do, and liking the people that they work with. So you'll find them tossing their hat in the ring for director level roles too. So it's important. Again, if nothing else, that's what I want you to take away from this is you can easily disqualify yourself from interviewing. And I'm going to try to help you account for the things that don't throw you off your game. So from an interviewer perspective, the Chicagoland market and Illinois overall is a busy market in the Treasury space. Treasury Talent, what we do is we monitor jobs and we monitor movement across 47 different markets in the US. Chicago is the 4th biggest market behind California, Texas, and then New York. And then it falls to Chicago. So just to give you an idea, through September 30th of this year, because I'm still working on October's numbers, these numbers are outside of banking, but what you'll see as you monitor activity is you'll have a lot of reposts because it takes a while to fill jobs in Treasury. I think we all know that the time to fill is a little bit higher than we'd all like. But so you have about 138 total jobs that are advertised or have been advertised that are unique, meaning that they hadn't shown up at any other point in 2020. So really, it's a pretty busy market. As I mentioned, it's the 4th busiest market that we monitor. California is roughly double, if not triple that. New York's just a slight titch ahead, and Texas falls in between New York and California. Probably about the halfway point between New York and California. But getting back to my point from earlier, if you're an interviewer and you're looking to hire an analyst or a manager, 61.6% of those jobs that are advertised are at the analyst and manager levels. So it's a competitive market if you're looking to hire, and part of ensuring that you're able to hire the person that you want to hire is by ensuring that you're providing them with a good interview experience. So what happens if you provide a bad interview experience? I'm going to hit you with some stats here. It definitely works against you. So if you don't provide a positive experience throughout your interview process, 83% of people surveyed have said that a negative experience will change their mind about a company that they liked or that they had interest in. Now, if you're in business to consumer and you're providing bad interview experience, that means that you're also losing customers. We all know that Treasury is also a very tight-knit community. The TMAC is a perfect example of that. Someone has a bad experience at company A, I'm going to go tell Chris. If Chris has an interest in company A, he may not apply. It's all of a sudden you go from people excited about an opportunity to they're actively working against you. 42%, if they have a bad experience, won't engage with your company and they won't apply again. So all of a sudden they're not going to be responding to your recruiter's passive outreach. They're not responding to your passive outreach just because something along the lines or something along the way in that process alienated them, and you may not even know. And all the trick to this is all of this is in your control. And then actually, I mentioned detractors earlier, but 22% will actively work against you. They'll actively just say, nope, don't go do this. Here's the experience that I had with this company. You want nothing to do with them. Trust me, it was a miserable interview experience. And we all know that bad news spreads faster than good. So again, this is just making sure that we're providing positive experiences, and this coaching ties into it. And then 9%, in addition to that, will vocally and actively voice their opinion and tell people publicly not to go apply to your company or not to work for your company. That's where Glassdoor can get you in trouble. LinkedIn, I don't think most people are pretty smart about their social presence, so you won't see it too much on LinkedIn, but Glassdoor, you can definitely reading through company reviews, you'll get a pretty good feel as to what people are thinking or the experiences that they've had either as an employee, or I've seen interviewees who provide that feedback as well. Now, finishing that off, workforce technical capabilities do vary. And with the shift to video interviewing, I think we're a couple of months deep into this now, but you can easily find yourself at a disadvantage if you're not familiar with the technology, if you're not comfortable with the technology, if something goes wrong in the middle of the interview and you don't know how to fix it, or maybe even heading into the interview and you don't know how to fix it, you're going into that interview rattled. All of a sudden, your head's not in the right space. You're not properly conveying your experience or why you're right for the job, or maybe you're just distracted. And that can easily cost you an opportunity to either hire the person that you want, or the job that you want. So the more savvy you are from a technical standpoint, the more you practice, the more you get comfortable with it, the more you figure out how to troubleshoot, and the less you worry about things going wrong, or if things do go wrong, you kind of become a little bit less flappable, a little bit more unflappable. So the whole idea is, even if it's practicing with friends, coworkers, someone in your network that you trust, try to utilize the technology ahead of time. We'll get into this in a little bit, or it could even be with the recruiter who's organizing the interview. That's what happens for the most part. You may not have that opportunity if they don't have an internal HR or recruiting team. The hiring manager is setting up interviews on his or her own. You may not have that opportunity, and that's where you'd want to take advantage of your network. I know the people that I work with, I always offer that up before they go into their interviews, just to do a quick tech check, make sure that everything's working with their cameras, with their internet connection, and just to make sure that they're comfortable on camera, and just to kind of lighten things up a little bit. Because again, the whole idea with this is you want to put your best foot forward. And I don't think it's any secret. I mean, when Chris and I first talked about this was going to be an in-person presentation, and I mentioned this earlier, but video interviews are just different. I think if you've been on the job search any time over the last 5, 6, 7 months, it's a little bit different when you're in front of a video instead of sitting in front of someone face-to-face in a conference room. And then even when you break it down to the types of video interviews that exist, you have 2 different types. You have the in-person interviews, and those are usually in-person and recorded. So it'll be conducted via a Zoom, maybe a Skype, FaceTime's another one, BlueJeans is another one, Microsoft Teams, any kind of other conferencing technology. But the whole idea with this, and how I define this, is there's a live interviewer on the other side. So you can actually read facial expressions. You can interact with the person, and there's actually a flow to the conversation. And for my preference, I prefer that type of engagement if I do have to do a video interview, just because it's a little bit less awkward. Because the alternative to that is what we'll call the recorded interview. And I don't know if anyone's taken part in these before, but really it's you talking to a computer screen. Maybe there's a pre-recorded question, or maybe there's a text question that pops up in front of you, and you may have a limited number of attempts to give the proper answer, or the answer that you want to give. Or you may just have the one shot at it, and you're pretty much crossing your fingers while you're answering the question, that you don't trip over yourself or start coughing or anything like that. It can be very, very awkward. I know when I was coming out of college, there were some large organizations that I had interviewed with who already had implemented video interviewing. I can tell you, or the recorded interviews, and you just don't know how you did. You don't get to watch yourself at the end. It leaves a lot to just kind of get in your head about. So you want to be prepared for those, and you want to make sure that you're clarifying what kind of interview this will be as that interview is being scheduled with you. So really, the tips that we're going to discuss today are going to be more applicable for the in-person type interviews, just because, as I mentioned, it's preferred from my end, and that does tend to be, thankfully, the most common format of virtual interview that I see today. So I think that's probably what you'll run into more so than the recorded.
Joe, I had a quick question. This is
Yeah.
Patrick. And again, I certainly encourage the rest of the membership in attendance. If you do have questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat and we'll pass that along. Joe, do you see a lot of those recorded interviews in the Treasury space? Like I could certainly understand it in a more technical environment where the questions might be a little bit more black and white in terms of the answer. Are you seeing those recorded interviews within Treasury? Clearly you said the in-person is more common, but just curious overall.
Yeah. So what you'll usually find, and if you're being recorded, of course, they should let you know. I think that's, that gets into legal boundaries or something if that's not publicly announced. But there's actually recruiting technology or HR tech that allows so people can focus on the conversation and not have to take notes. They'll record the entire interview, and what that allows you to do is go back and actually hear the questions being answered and how they were answered. That way you're focusing on the conversation, not on whether or not you took the proper notes. So just the in-person has been most common. Recorded I've seen here and there, but it's something that can trip you up because any mistake you make, you're not even thinking about it, but someone else gets to go back and kind of Monday morning quarterback you and watch the game film. So just something you want to be aware of. That was a good question, Patrick. Thank you. I appreciate that. So flipping over to the actual video interview tips now. The most important thing, and that's why I have it listed up top, is you want to prepare just like you would if it was a normal interview, if you had to travel into an office to go meet someone. Basically, what you want to do there is you want to have your resume and or your LinkedIn profile pulled up. And if you have a resume pulled up, you want to make sure it's the same one that you presented to the role. It's important for an interviewee because you don't want to be, if you have multiple versions of your resume, you don't want to be saying, oh, well, I don't know which version you have or what's in front of you. You want to make sure that there's that common ground. That way, if you're referring to the document in some way, shape, or form, the other person's making that connection and understands what you're talking about. For interviewers, I have run into people that just come in completely unprepared, haven't looked at the resume, and then you sit down and you take a look at the resume. And I've had, luckily in a previous life, not so much in the Treasury space, but people just be like, why am I talking to you? Or I don't even know who you are, or what am I interviewing you for, or anything like that. You think about it as a job seeker, you're taking your time, you've already come in to prepare, you're taking time out of your day to come in and interview with someone. And now all of a sudden they don't even know why they're there or why they're speaking with you. That's not going to give you a very favorable impression. You're probably not going to be very interested in joining that company or working with that person. The other important piece that you want to have in front of you, have the job description in front of you. From a job seeker perspective, that allows you to really familiarize yourself with the points that you need to hit on. And it'll give you a pretty good idea of probably what's going to be covered during the course of the interview if you look at the requirements and the experience. It allows you to kind of game plan what your answers are going to be. Star behavioral interviewing has been popular for a very long time. It's instead of asking yes or no questions, it's open-ended. Tell me about a time when, what have you done with, like instead of just have you done this or will you do this, that type of stuff. So have the job description in front of you. It's important, especially if you are not the hiring manager, from an interviewer perspective, that you also have the job description in front of you. That way you have an idea of what types of questions you should be asking. Again, haven't run into it too much in the Treasury space. It's been more in a previous life, especially in IT. This was just rampant, where people are just coming in, having no idea who they're talking to or what they're talking about. So again, Treasury seems to be a little bit more prepared, but no matter which side of the table you're on, you want to make sure that you have the necessary documentation in front of you so that you're somewhat prepared and that you have common points of interest. Another one, very simple, and this doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you're interviewing in person, over video, bring energy. Nobody wants to talk to the wet blanket, and you got to bring energy to the conversation. That goes for both sides too. And that's why as a hiring manager, you want to be very careful who you're including in your interview process too. You want to make sure that those people are up to date on what you're looking for. That way you don't have a situation where everyone has an opinion, but there's no commonality. Usually it becomes tougher to come to a decision. But you just, You want to make sure that there's energy brought. You want to be excited. If you're a job seeker, you're talking about yourself. That's the opportunity to really sell, hey, I'm excited for this role. I'm excited that I can do this job, and I'm happy, really, really happy to be talking to you today. As an interviewer, it's just as important for all the things that we mentioned before. You have competition. If this person isn't taking a role with you, or even if they are interviewing with you, there's a good chance that they're interviewing with a couple of other companies as well. Treasury is a specialized skill set. There's competition out there. We already talked about what the Chicagoland areas look like over the last 9 months or so. And the whole idea is you just want to make sure that you're establishing good relationships with the people that you're looking to hire and that you're leaving them with a favorable impression. And we talked about why it doesn't matter if you're hiring the person or not. You want to make sure that you want to leave them wanting to work for you. And then last but not least, just on the preparation piece, have something to take notes. That way, I mentioned it with the recording technology earlier, but usually, and this is kind of a unique difference, or it's a difference between virtual interviewing and on-site interviewing. On-site, you have the pen and paper, you have something where it's writing and you're able to focus and write and focus at the same time. Computer, I mean, you have emails popping up, you have IMs popping up. Not only do you have your phone that's probably going off as a Treasury professional too, but if you're trying to type and take notes at the same time, I do it all the time, and I have to apologize to people because I type like a caveman, but I don't take written notes because I'd be doubling up work. So it's just like you hear the click clack in the background, and that can become distracting. And now if you have it on both sides, how do you have a conversation that way without talking over one another, or with even being able to pay attention with what's going on? On top of preparation, part of that preparation is checking your internet connection. The challenge that you'll commonly run into, and we see this on some of the Facebook Lives that we run, and even just, in internal meetings that we have, you'll see the freezing and you'll see the lagging. And what that can do, all of a sudden, a couple of things. So if it starts freezing and it starts lagging, all of a sudden maybe a question was finished and you're waiting for someone to start responding. So then your natural response is, hey, did you hear me? And then all of a sudden that lag comes through and that person starts answering, and then you're answering over them. It turns into like this ping pong where you're both talking over each other, and it can become kind of choppy. And all of a sudden that can throw you off your game. It doesn't matter if you're interviewing or you're the interviewer. It can throw you off, and it can make for an awkward conversation. The other piece to that is you want to make sure that, again, you're double checking the technology ahead of time if you're able to. I had a situation with a person, they were going to be interviewing over Skype. All of a sudden the person's Microsoft Office was logging into their personal Skype, wouldn't allow them to get into the Skype. This is 5 minutes before the interview. That person's freaking out, calling me, trying to get a hold of the hiring manager. I'm trying to get a hold of the hiring manager at the same time. You're already panicked going into that interview. You've already kind of defeated yourself right up front. So it's important to check your internet connection. Run an internet speed test. You can Google it, just internet speed test. There are plenty of options by Googling it. Actually, check the connection to the application or the platform, as I had mentioned. Zoom, most of these platforms do have some sort of testing area or some sort of room that you can go to test your connection to make sure that everything's streaming properly. I know Zoom does. I believe most of the others do. It's important just to do that little bit of legwork up front, because that's a challenge that exists in video interviewing that obviously you don't have if you're interviewing face-to-face. And the other thing you can do, ask the recruiter who's scheduling the interview. It doesn't matter if it's third party or internal, whomever it may be. Just ask them to hop on a quick meeting with you to do a tech check and make sure that the microphone's working, the camera's working, you're able to connect to the platform, and that everything is streaming properly. These are the simple things that, again, you can knock out ahead of time that aren't going to leave you in a panic 5 minutes or 10 minutes before heading into that interview. Sticking to your allotted time. What do I mean by that? So, this also kind of ties into the preparation too. Usually if you're interviewing in person, you show up 10 to 15 minutes early, you sit in the lobby for a little bit, you have an opportunity to kind of mentally go over your notes. you know, what you want to say, what you're thinking, and just really making sure that you're comfortable with everything and that you're as basically not, that you don't have a lot of nervousness going into that interview. Sticking to your allotted, it's different in video interviewing because number one, you could be jumping from one meeting to another. All of a sudden you're in a Zoom room with a hiring manager opposed to an internal team member or a friend or whatever it may be. But from an interviewee perspective, it's important because you don't know what's happening in that room before you join. So if you join 10 to 15 minutes early, maybe you're joining an internal meeting, maybe you're joining another interview. And I mean, that can throw you off. I've had that happen in the past too. My recommendations there, it's just stick to the allotted start and end times. It's a sales trick, especially as you're approaching toward the end of the interview. If you have a half hour, say, hey, I know we're coming up on time. I want to be cognizant and I want to be appreciative of your and respectful of your time. Do you have a few more minutes to stay on? And they'll be honest on whether or not they can. I mean, both of you are trying to fit interviews into your schedule. It's, you know, it's kind of assumed in person that the schedule is there. You're usually taking more time off and not cramming as many meetings in if you have to go to an in-person interview opposed to a video interview. Again, if you're the interviewee, check with the recruiter or the person scheduling the interview to see what's appropriate. Say, like even Chris and I today talked about, hey, we'll join 10 minutes early, no big deal. We'll make sure we do the tech check, everything works. And everything turned out just fine, thankfully. So we're all good there, but just see what's appropriate from the interviewee side. From the interviewer side, don't schedule back-to-back meetings. Give yourself a 15-minute buffer because you never know. Like I do that when I'm talking to people, I give myself an hour because I know I'm a talker. And if I run into another talker, I don't want to have to cut that short because I'm running into another call. If it's a good conversation, we have a good rapport, and it's valuable for both sides. I'd rather continue that than stressing out about worrying about someone else joining the conversation. So that's what I have for stick to your allotted time. It's obviously important for those reasons. Next, be aware of your surroundings. Again, that's something that you don't necessarily have to worry about in an in-person interview. It's usually in it's a neutral environment. Most of the time it's going to be a conference room or a coffee shop. In video interviewing, sometimes it's in people's living rooms. I've been talking to people where their spouse walks past. Maybe they have dogs in the background. I have 4 dogs here and a wife. Thankfully, I have a home office, but I have to cross my fingers every time I go into a meeting that a turkey doesn't cruise by or something because we live out in the country. If they start barking, that can throw off an interview pretty quickly. I've run into people who've had drug paraphernalia in the background, not even realizing it. And it's just like, okay, well, I know your answer on whether or not you can pass a drug test. So it's just the little stuff that can throw you off or that can cost you an opportunity. I try to keep it neutral. You can see it's no secret that I went to Michigan State. I am a Detroit Tigers fan, even though they're terrible right now. Lions fan, I try to keep that out of here too. But you know what it does is it brings up interesting conversation pieces. For instance, Simon and I were on a Zoom call with a treasurer of a fintech and a senior member of his team, and the senior member's daughter had walked past, and all of a sudden he started talking to the daughter. It can be endearing. You can flip that around and it can really help lighten the mood. But if you're already tense going into the interview and something like that happens, or all of a sudden like you don't even realize it and say, I see something over my shoulder, I'm focused on that the whole time. I'm distracted from the conversation. It's not going to go well. So the things you can do, you just want to make sure that you're in a quiet area, as quiet as can be. And if for whatever reason you can't find that quiet area, you can't go to a car, you don't have a separate bedroom, whatever it may be, just set the expectation. Say, hey, sorry, I have dogs. They may bark at some point. It is what it is. Like I said, most people are pretty cool with it. Everyone's been understanding. You do run into the occasional person who's a stickler about it, but you just want to make sure that you're anticipating any challenges that could potentially pop up so that it doesn't throw you off. And dirty laundry is another one, surprisingly. You'll just see people with like shirts hanging from shelves or whatever it may be. And it's just like, okay, I got you. So again, it doesn't have to be a completely clear space. It just has to be a space that you're comfortable in and one that you're comfortable having a conversation in that can go back and forth. Maintain a professional appearance. It's important, especially during an interview for both sides. Working from home all the time, you show up to an in-person interview, of course you're going to be dressed to the nines. You want to put your best foot forward. You're working from home. It's all of a sudden weird if I show up to an internal meeting wearing this because I know that I have an interview right after, and my team's going to be like, what the heck? You're usually in shorts and a t-shirt. What's going on? I'm not, but just as an example. It creates another level of difficulty, and a lot of people just forget about it. Like, because you're just working from home, you're like, oh crap, I have to interview, and then you forget to put on maybe a suit coat or a button down or whatever it may be. You just want to make sure you can. First appearances are still everything. Doesn't matter if it's virtual or in person. So it's something where you can easily get tripped up. And again, it's not any groundbreaking information or tip, but it's just something to keep in the back of your head as you are interviewing, because you're still on display. So really, as I mentioned, just dress the same way that you would for an in-person, because again, you're on display. You're better off being overdressed than underdressed, and they'll be very specific when they schedule the interview on whether or not you should be casual with what you're wearing. I by default just always go at least business casual to ensure that I'm not wearing like a Lions t-shirt that day or something like that. So again, something that you wouldn't have to worry about in person, but definitely have to worry about virtually. And then last but not least, please, please, please establish a rapport. I don't care what it is. It's, hey, how's the weather where you are? Where are you from? How are things going? How are you doing? It just makes a world of difference, and it sets the tone for the conversation for everyone when you actually show or you ask a question instead of just jumping right in and grilling somebody. It's different. It's more difficult for me. Like in a previous life, when I would interview for my team, I would just take them on walking interview tours because number one, it allows me to introduce the team. They get a feel for the environment, and it allows us just to have a conversation. I would rather walk than sit any day of the week. But I've run into hiring managers who, I'll go back to an example. There was a client we were working with. They sat down with the person they were interviewing. Not even a, hey, how are you? Thanks for your time. Thanks for joining. It was well, typically I don't interview people who don't have a CTP, so why should I interview you? And it's like, wow, that's a really, really tough cold open. But if you're sitting on the other side of that, all of a sudden you're put on the defensive, you're thrown off because, just, I don't know, just basic, having a personality, basic common interaction with people is, hey, good morning, good afternoon, how are you? What's going on? How are you feeling? Just like that type of stuff. Interviewing is a two-way street. There's no way around it. Doesn't matter which side of the desk you're on. Again, you want to make sure that it's conversational. You want to make sure that you're being friendly and that you're leaving the other person with a good impression. Doesn't matter whether you want the job or not. Doesn't matter whether or not you want to hire that person. You want to leave them with a positive impression because, again, especially in Treasury, with it being so tight-knit, you never know who's talking to whom about whatever, and you don't want to be the topic. You don't want to be on the wrong end of the topic of conversation. It's basically what it comes down to. And then lastly, for interviewees, be prepared to ask questions about the company and the position. If maybe some of your questions were answered throughout the course of the interview, reconfirm. Just say, hey, here's what I was thinking. Here's what I heard. Is that right? Just to repeat back, to show that you were paying attention, that you had an interest in the conversation. I can't tell you how awkward it is when you sit there and maybe you have a conversation for half hour, 45 minutes. Hey, do you have any questions? No, I'm good. It's like, okay, well, did we accomplish anything today? Like, well, what's going on from there? It can be intimidating because you don't want to ask the wrong question, but the truth is there is no wrong question. If you position it as, even if your question's already been answered, if you position it as just confirming that, that's something, because again, it shows that you were paying attention. And then if, as an interviewee, if you're interested in the job, ask for it. I can't tell you how many times, you talk to someone after an interview and it's just like, well, how'd everything go? Well, I don't know. I don't know how the hiring manager is going to feel about this. If you can't think of another question, I'll give you a freebie. Just ask the question, either what are the next steps in the process? If that's already been covered, okay, I know what the next step is. Do you have any concerns about what we've talked about today that would prevent you from moving me forward in this process? All of a sudden, you're going to get real-time feedback. You don't have to go through HR. You don't have to go through anything else. If this person's a good hiring leader, they're going to provide you with that feedback. If not, and you don't get that feedback and they're like, no, everything's good, and then all of a sudden you get a rejection letter, you may have dodged a bullet. Because if they can't deliver that feedback to you real time right there, how are they going to handle performance evaluations, or if something goes wrong, when you have all this volatility that you've had basically since March, when rubber's meeting the road, how's that person going to be in delivering feedback and having that conversation with you then if they can't even do it during an interview? That's where a lot of hiring managers go wrong, is they just don't deliver real-time feedback. And I know that a lot of them don't do it because of the concern around HR and lawsuits and everything else that goes into it. But the reality with this is you got to be open and honest with people, and they're investing their time and their effort to come interview with you. As an interviewer, don't be afraid to tell someone that you're interested in the job too. Like, I think we get into this kind of this mental gray area where we want to play coy. Everyone wants to be wanted or wants to be chosen. So maybe we're putting on a little bit of a sales pitch during the interview, or maybe we're a little bit more salesy than we could be. But when it comes to an interviewer perspective, it's like, oh, well, I can't let them know I'm interested, because then all of a sudden, that's where the game's over. They know that they have leverage. They have the upper hand. Not even the case. I mean, think about it. If someone's excited about the role coming out of your interview, you want them to be excited about coming to work for you, and you're excited to be adding them to your team. And so don't be afraid to communicate that. I'm not saying offer them the job on the spot or anything, but just say, yes, you're definitely going to hear from us. I loved our conversation today. Thank you very much. Like, just close it out properly, leave them with a good impression, and get out of your own head. Don't worry about the leverage piece. Just be open and honest with people, and it sets the tone for your relationship, whether it's your working relationship the rest of the way, whether or not that person's hired, because you never know, especially in Treasury, when you might cross paths again. So with that, that's everything I have for the presentation. Have we had any additional questions come in? Or, I mean, usually this will turn into kind of an ask a recruiter type scenario in other presentations, and I'm perfectly comfortable with that too.
No questions have come through in the chat, so membership, feel free to ask any if they come to mind. I'm happy to ask a couple. I know I've interviewed for more than a couple of jobs.
Yeah.
And one question that I've gotten twice in interviews that even though I've read up on this question and felt like I should be prepared to answer it, both times I felt a little bit like a deer in the headlights when I got it, which was, tell me about your biggest weakness. And each time I feel like I failed to answer that question correctly. Is that something that you get commonly, Joe?
Yeah. And was your answer, my biggest weakness is I care too much?
No. I gave a line about how I had a weakness, but I've learned to overcome it.
Yeah. No, you just flip it around into a strength, and you say,
Exactly.
look, I mean, you can very easily just use that as, hey, here's something that I've identified based on feedback I received in the past. Here's exactly how I worked through it, because it shows that, number one, you're open to receiving feedback and coaching. Number two, it shows that you're self-aware enough to address the problem and turn it into a strength. And I would, if possible, give an example of how that became a success for you.
Oh, okay. We've got, oh, wow. We just got a bunch of questions.
Cool.
All right. Well, I'll just start with the first one. So from Vikas, thanks, Vikas. Hello. I've heard arguments both ways about a matching offer from the current employer when the employee turns in the notice. Would like your thoughts on the same. Yeah.
Counter offers are dangerous. And it's coming, granted, I have a vested interest in this, but I've been on both sides of it, where either you're the corporate or you're the third party who's working through this. You get no benefit from it. of course, it's tough to paint with a broad brush, but when it comes to counteroffers, I forgot what the percentages are off the top of my head, but it's north of 75% of people wind up leaving within 18 months anyway. Because usually what's going to happen is you get a bigger title or a bigger job, but the same frustration is still there. That's why when I talk to people, I always ask, hey, what are your decision-making criteria? And as I'm speaking with people as well, when I ask them why they're looking for a new position, I always ask if they've addressed it with their current manager or how their current manager would take it if they did put in notice. Because number one, you get a feel for whether or not you're going to be up against a counteroffer, and part two to that, whether or not they'd even consider a counteroffer. Counteroffers are just dangerous because when you think about it, you had to actually quit on them for them to do anything to take care of you. So what does that say? And then part two to that is all of a sudden you're expendable because they know that you were looking and you were interviewing anyway. So it just goes down a slippery slope. And as much as I want to say and play the middle that, hey, it doesn't really matter. No, it breaches that trust with your manager and with your leader. So I highly advise against counteroffers. It doesn't matter which side you're on.
Great, thanks. Next question from Kathy McGarry. Do you also work with companies that are looking for student internships? This one might be a little bit targeted at something specific.
Yeah. No, I haven't run into that just yet. Typically when companies are hiring or they're working with us to hire someone, it's going to be the experienced treasury professionals. I always say, and Simon will say, we're good at finding people their second job and beyond in treasury, not necessarily their first. I talk to people who are in college and give them tips on their job search and what they should be doing for interviewing and that type of stuff all the time. Typically, a company looking to hire a treasury professional out of college isn't going to go to a third party because you can do that through your own recruiting efforts or through an internship or a rotational program. They're not going to, just to be perfectly frank about it, they're not going to shell out money to a third party to identify college grads or anything like that. And we don't have a way of doing that because I think maybe as it just Northern Illinois is the only one that has any kind of undergrad, at least that I'm aware of in the US, that has any kind of undergrad curriculum for treasury specifically.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then from Melanie, so thank you, Melanie. Any advice on when you're all set for a virtual interview with multiple people and you're the only one in the video when interviewers are all only speaking and not on video?
Oh, gosh. Man, that's a tough one. You can't even see the people who are on the other side of the interview. With that, I would probably just place like a little piece of paper over it and just look at a camera. That way you don't have to watch yourself or anything like that. The one thing that you'll want to be very careful with, and we run into this when our team gets on Facebook live chats every week, is when you go to ask a question to an interviewer, ask the question specifically to the interviewer. If you don't address that person by name and you just ask a general question, what you run into is 3 or 4 people are going to try to answer at once. They all try to talk over each other, then the question gets lost. So if you're the only person who's on video and you're not comfortable just like talking to yourself and watching yourself talk, put a piece of paper over your screen so you don't have to watch yourself. That would be my thing. That's exactly what I do so I don't get in my own head.
Yeah, that also sounds like the interviewer providing a bad experience, which I think you touched on during your presentation.
For sure. If you're going to ask someone else to be on video, I would surely hope that you would be on video to kind of level that playing field and just to have a real connection, a real conversation.
Yep. And then from Scott Brooks, how often do you hear hiring managers ask specifically for the CTP designation?
It really depends. You know, some will take experience over the education. Some prefer the education. It's usually the ones that have that have gone through CTP and are a part of AFP and the TMAs. Those are going to be the ones who look at it as an investment in yourself. It's tough to actually say, you know, all the time you need a CTP. I definitely come from the line of thought that it's best to invest in yourself, and the CTP is the perfect way to do it. And what that does is it also opens up a new network to you because all of a sudden you're exposed to the AFP. You have there's commonality or a common ground with other people who have either their CFA or their CTP. So if anything, it's kind of like I look at it as pretty much the same way as getting a graduate degree. Well, you get an MBA because number one, you want the education, but part two, it opens up a new network to you. The CTP and all of that does the exact same thing. So if you're on the fence about it and you can either get your company to pay for it or you found a way to finance it yourself, just go ahead and do it. Like, you're better off having it and not needing it than needing it and not having it.
Yeah, from a personal experience, I'll say that I got my CTP and it really helped open some doors. And then a follow-up question from David. Any certificates after the CTP that you have seen in demand? And he said, besides the MBA.
No, it's usually the CTP. It depends on the type of work and also the industry that it's in. You get into financial services and that type of stuff. Maybe they're looking at a CFA or whatever it may be, but usually it doesn't go beyond the CTP. Actualized Consulting actually put a really good article together on continuing your education in Treasury. I'll have to pull that down, and Chris, I can send it over to you if you want to send it to the group.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, cool.
All right, we got one more question here from Claire. What area do you see as the most common field for Treasury professionals to transition to outside of Treasury specific function?
Well, it's kind of interesting because you need to have a specific skill set to get in, because Treasury is specialized. I don't want to say it's a one-way street, but it takes a lot more to get into Treasury than it does to get out. Usually you're coming from some sort of accounting or corporate finance background, so it'd be just as easy if you did fall out of love with the profession, or for whatever reason you found yourself needing, or maybe there's just not a lot of opportunity in Treasury since it is so specialized. You're going to find more opportunities in FP&A. You're going to find more opportunities in accounting because it's more common. Any kind of corporate finance is going to be more common in most industries and companies than Treasury would be. So that's what I love about Treasury, though. At the same time, is Treasury sits between FP&A and accounting, so you have to know both. You might not be an accountant by trade. You might not have any interest in that. You're probably going to veer more toward an FP&A type role. But that would be, you can, depending on your skill set and your technical knowledge, I would think you can slide both ways.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, to the group, any last questions? We're almost out of time anyway. Patrick, you got anything?
Nothing additional in terms of questions, and I don't see Kathy McGarry with a go green comment in the chat.
Go white.
But I don't think we have any additional questions. I would just like to say, Joe, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. This was very insightful, and I think for folks that are seeking a job, for those that are doing interviews, very good refresher on many points that are so unique to the video interviewing environment. It's great to hear your insights, as well as for folks that are just preparing for critical meetings. That would be a video meeting with other peers or whoever it might be. I think all great tips all around. So thank you again on behalf of all of TMAC. And I would remind everyone after this session, after we conclude this session, please feel free to join us for a TMAC talk session where we'll be able to discuss openly any questions or concerns folks have, whether they be related to Treasury practitioners or if it is just general socializing. So please feel free to join us there. And there is a separate Zoom link that is on the invite that was sent earlier today. So unless there were any final questions or comments, I think we can wrap up. And again, thank you, Joe, and as well as thank you, Chris and David, for all of the great programming that you have put together so far this year. Really great topics and great presenters. And thank you again, Joe.
Oh no, thank you for the opportunity. It was a blast. I wish it was in person. Hopefully at some point it will be, but I hope it was informational and that there were some takeaways here. If there's anything I can do, or if anyone has any follow-up questions, feel free to pass them along, and I'll certainly get them answered for you.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe.
All right. Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Chris.